Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing? Can everybody hear me okay?
Great. Yes.
Awesome. So my name is Pete Late. I'm a detective with Hendersonville Police Department, and I've been doing that for, how do I advance the slide?
Just the arrow.
So I'm a detective with the Hendersonville Police Department. I've worked for Hendersonville PD for about 9 years. During that time, I have been a patrol officer, a canine officer, canine handler, a field training officer, and most recently a detective for about the last year and a half. I'm married to my wife, Jennifer. We just celebrated our 21st wedding anniversary recently. We've got 2 sons, Ryan and Aiden. Prior to being in law enforcement, I was an automotive technician. I spent some time as a chef when my wife and I first got married, did some culinary school at AB Tech. And prior to that, I was in the United States Marine Corps. Little background on why I became a police officer. I didn't become a police officer until I was about 35. My oldest son was about 5 years old. I was working at the city fleet maintenance garage, and I started doing ride-alongs with some of the officers and saw a need in the community for somebody with my skill set. I am very outspoken, and I tend to let people know when they're doing something wrong. So I felt like that kind of lent itself well to law enforcement. And that's kind of where I began my law enforcement career. And so right around the time my wife was pregnant with our second son, she was actually working with St. Gerard House. I think she was doing an internship is what she was doing for her master's degree in counseling. And I got to know a lot of the folks that work at St. Gerard, and I got to know a lot of the kids. My oldest son, Ryan, came and helped out with a summer camp a time or two. And so I kind of have a soft spot in my heart for the folks at St. Gerard. Early on in my career, I came by and visited when I was on patrol when time would allow. And I've done a few impromptu kind of demonstrations over the years and just stop by and chat. And I've seen the need over the years for particularly our newer officers to be trained specifically to deal with people in crisis. Because I know you all have probably seen in the news and just maybe in your own experiences that law enforcement does not always handle situations with people in crisis properly, and a lot of it has to do with proper training. So at Hendersonville Police Department, we have implemented training for new officers that covers a gambit of different scenarios that they might encounter during a patrol shift. And part of that is the crisis intervention training, where it's a 1-week class that they are required to attend, and it covers people with mental disabilities. It covers PTSD for folks, veteran or non-veteran. Caroline and Courtney came and did a presentation at the most recent one. I actually have started teaching that class at Blue Ridge Community College this year. And I find that it's been really successful in helping our officers kind of put another tool on their belt, so to speak, as far as dealing with folks in crisis and getting them the help they need instead of acting inappropriately or overreacting to a situation that doesn't really require a police response to begin with. So as far as I have 4 PowerPoint slides. I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint. So I thought that I would just kind of open it up to you all and kind of let you dictate how the evening goes as far as what you want to talk about. If you've got questions about law enforcement response to certain situations, I can certainly answer that to the best of my ability from my own experience and from our department's standpoint. I do have a question. Does everybody live within Henderson County? that's tuning in this evening?
Yes, but there might be, we're recording this, and so some people may be watching it who aren't in Henderson County.
Okay.
But probably the most of the people on are.
Well, so I'll start out by saying that throughout my career, I've had several instances that kind of pop up in my mind where I've responded to a call for service where somebody was in crisis, and it wasn't necessarily a police matter, but a lot of times due to the time of day when it's occurring, or just the nature of what may be happening or what's perceived to be happening. A lot of times law enforcement is called because, quite frankly, people don't know who else to call sometimes. And I'll give an example. About 6 years ago, maybe now, we got a 911 call, and this lady was driving down Oakland Street, and she called 911. She told the dispatcher, there's a teenage male running down the street screaming to leave me alone, and there's an older male with a beard chasing him down the street. And so my entire team responded to that. There's typically 6 of us on a shift. And when we got there, I think I was the second officer on scene. I saw Cliff, who works for St. Gerard, talking to a young man who was obviously very agitated. And so a lot of times, from the police perspective, we get very little information that's a lot of times third-hand information. Somebody drives by, sees a split second of a situation, and thinks that it's somebody's having, an emergency that requires our response. Fortunately, in that situation, I knew Cliff. I knew where he worked, and given the situation and the location, we were able to kind of step back and say, hey, we're here if you need us. And something that was really helpful for some of the other officers on our team was that there was another young lady that was there, and I can't remember her name now, but she told us, like, hey, your presence here is probably making the situation worse. We've got vehicles parked in the street with blue lights on them, which we are required to do if we're not parked in a parking space, if we're stopped on the side of the road. So that was really helpful for us to be able to, all right, hey, everybody go back to work. I'll hang out over here in the parking lot in case they need me. And I think that having the knowledge of the people and what was going on, I think that helped because that situation, given maybe a brand new officer that's kind of gung ho and ready to go, it might have gone a little differently. And so with that in mind, when we have new officers that come to our department, as a field training officer, I would always bring trainees by Oakland Street. I'd point out the building, say, hey, this is what they do here. You may get calls like this, and this may be what's going on. And one thing I always tell new officers, and I think it's important for folks in the community as well, is to get to know the community that you're policing, and get out and meet folks. And one thing that has been beneficial to me in knowing that we have some folks living in our area that have special needs, whether it be on the spectrum or they've got some mental disabilities or even some physical disabilities, is to for those folks to reach out to the police department and EMS and say, hey, we live here. You may respond, or somebody may call. And I think it's important, especially in Hendersonville and Henderson County, our departments are small enough that you could come by the police department and introduce yourselves and say, hey, we'd like to get to know the officers that are patrolling our area. There's a young man that we've been called to his house probably 4 times a week for the first 5 years that I worked for the police department. And we got to the point where we would go by and visit him when he was not having a crisis and established a relationship with him. And so that when he was in crisis, when they did need us to come and help, get him calmed down. We already had a rapport built with him, and his mom actually came and did a training for our patrol teams, saying, hey, you know, if this happens, this is the best practice that we have found to help get him under control. And unfortunately, the issue with him is that his parents are both very short and he is very big. He's a big statured young man. And it got to the point where when he was having a crisis, that he was overpowering his parents and causing some issues. And I found, specifically with him, by establishing a relationship with him, you know, it was easier to communicate with him when he was in crisis. So I've been talking a lot. Does anybody have any questions for me? Anything you'd like me to talk about? I can't hear anybody.
You should be able to. They're muted.
Does anybody have an experience that they'd like to talk about too, and you know, just to kind of share?
Absolutely. So we actually have the capability with our dispatching system to put little flags for an address. So, like for instance, I'll use, you know, if EMS is called to a location and somebody that lives there has assaulted somebody in the past, dispatch can have a flag that saying approach with caution. So absolutely, that is definitely something that can be done. For the sheriff's office is 697-4911. And the sheriff's office actually takes all 911 calls. And if it's a 911 call for city police, it will get transferred to one of our dispatchers. So I don't have the number for the Buncombe County Communications Center, but it'd be the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office, or if you're inside the city limits, Asheville PD. I believe they have their own dispatch in the city.
Okay. I put both numbers in the chat.
Sure. So if you're on a 911, you know, or just say, you know, my child is in crisis. And I can't speak for all law enforcement officers, but I know that if one of our officers that works for HPD heard over the radio, you know, mother called 911 and said, my child is in crisis, that's going to flip a switch for me and for all of our officers that work for HPD. Hey, that's a specific phrase that I associate with somebody that either has a disability or is maybe on the spectrum. It kind of changes the way I'm thinking versus, you know, I got a guy chasing a teenager down the street. You know, it kind of puts me in a different frame of mind. And a lot of times dispatch will put more information in the CAD call than what they're putting out over the radio, because they're continuing to talk to the caller. Unfortunately, when I'm running lights and siren across town to get to them, I can't read that. So if you know, there's specific, that one thing, my child is in crisis, for me, that flips a switch and I completely change my way of thinking as to what I'm responding to. And that is a good question for, you know, if you live outside of one of our jurisdictions, that's a thing to ask a department. Do you have any specific wording that you use to describe somebody in crisis, that or where there needs to be some kind of help with intervening, either to prevent injury to themselves or to somebody else, or just to get, you know, a lot of times I know my youngest son has a tendency to have a temper tantrum every now and then, and it always seems to happen in Walmart when we're near the toys. and, it draws a crowd, or gets a lot of stares. And typically I will pick him up and carry him out. And, I've responded to those calls from onlookers at Walmart, you know, this man is being abusive to his child when really he's just trying to help him be calm, and so I think even with onlookers, if you said something like, "Hey, my child's in crisis, please give us some space," that I know for my son, it makes the world of difference, and and so that's kind of where I'm at with that. But I think getting to know your local police department. So if in my contact information is up there, and Caroline, if you want to put up my cell phone number, that's fine too. They've not put that on my business card for whatever reason, but it's 828
Okay.
490 6147.
Okay, so that's in the chat. But what I was gonna say, some people, especially when they, on any given good day, have their hands full with more than one child, and especially if one of them has autism, or I get it. I have two children with autism, and their toddler years were very difficult, and we have had several people make up sort of little pass out business cards that basically says, thank you for understanding. My son is on the autism spectrum. If, we're professionals, or I'm his mom and I'm working on this skill, or whatever. The card can just say, thank you for understanding. My child's on the autism spectrum. If you have any questions, you may call me later, but I appreciate your, whatever you want to say. And we have some cards printed up for staff at St. Gerard House if they're in any given situation to say, I'm a trained professional, I'm working on some skill, and here's our card. If you have any questions, you can call the main number at St. Gerard House and ask about the work that we do. Just to kind of appease people's natural curiosity as well as their inclination to interfere, or feel like they need to rescue somebody or call the police, or we've had plenty of times when, and people talked about this in the beginning, when people have called the police on some of our kids during a school day at St. Gerard House, because they didn't understand what was going on, and a child was just screaming or something, or an older kid was running around, and so that's super helpful and easy to do.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm glad you brought that up about the cards, because I think if you are in the middle of successfully dealing with a situation where you don't need my help, if I happen to show up, even if you just said, hey, I don't need you, sometimes, I don't know, people just get a kick out of calling 911 for some reason. Because I don't know, they see something, they perceive it a certain way, and sometimes it's legitimate and sometimes it's not. And of course, we have to treat everything like it's legitimate until we find out it's not. But if I were to show up on scene and you told me, hey, my child's in crisis, or handed me a card and told me, like, I don't need your help, or I do need your help. And at that point, if you give me direction, I'll follow it. So I can help you the best way I can. At the end of the day, and speaking for myself, and I know all the officers that I work with, we're here to serve and protect the community and provide the services to the community that they require of us. And if that means sitting down and talking with somebody, or just standing there while you get a break, or whatever needs to be done, I don't know anybody that would overreact to that. we are at our agency, we are more than willing to do whatever we have to do. And I kind of harp on the getting to know your community, but it has served me very well. And you know, our officers will typically work a rotating shift through the different beats of the city. Where, you know, one day I might be working out by Walmart, and the next day I might be working, you know, down by the fresh market. But I make it a point to get out and talk to everybody I can, that I see, that I have time to talk to in between calls. And that is particularly with our folks that require either more supervision or they're more prone to crisis. I establishing a rapport as a police officer is hugely important, because, you know, we kind of get a bad rap. Typically we meet people when they're having probably their worst day ever. And for some officers that takes its toll, and it can make you really jaded, and you know, and that's on them for checking that at the door. But and I'll say this: if you find that you have an officer that responds inappropriately to a situation, or you feel like they didn't respond appropriately, as a training officer and as somebody that's relatively high up in the police department in my career right now, I would want to hear about it. You know, so, and there again, so if, you know, if you feel like you run into an officer that doesn't handle something right, absolutely call their chain of command. I know our chief has an open door policy with everyone. I know the sheriff of Henderson County does, and I can't speak for other agencies, but here recently things have been handled appropriately as far as I'm concerned. And there again, if you catch an officer doing something great, it doesn't hurt to let somebody know about that as well. I know some of the best notes I ever got were from St. Gerard House, and when I had canines, I used to go to preschools and schools, and I'd love to get those little notes to the chief from students saying how much they enjoyed having us come there and talk to them. Do we have any other questions? So we work typically, well, at HPD, we work a 12-hour shift. And so we typically work 2 days on and then 2 days off, and then 3 days on, 2 days off. And then it switches. Well, to get to retirement, in North Carolina, we have to work 25 years. Fastest way is to call 911. And we use mobile crisis a lot, especially if somebody already has somebody they're working with. Mobile crisis can get us hooked up with them very fast. And if law enforcement is requesting it, they have to respond like within 45 minutes or so. Early on in my career, that system didn't work very well, but they have ironed the kinks out of it, and it works out pretty good now. Caroline might be able to shed a little more light as far as specifics in Henderson County, but typically as a patrol officer, I use mobile crisis, and they kind of take the ball and run with it from there.
What does mobile crisis entail?
It entails me telling the dispatcher I need mobile crisis.
And then when they come out.
And then I give a name, a description, and any, if there's a counselor that they're working with, mobile crisis will kind of coordinate getting them there so you can focus on what you're doing. So if I've got something law enforcement related that I'm dealing with, I can do that, and mobile crisis can orchestrate getting everything else.
Okay.
Did that answer your question okay? Caroline, did you have anything to add to that?
Unfortunately, I don't, because I don't really know who's kind of on a mental health 24-hour call.
I think Courtney has something to add.
So as a part of, if your student attends SGH or if they have a therapist, the therapist is on essentially 24-hour call. So you can always leave a message with Rachel Cushing Cook. And then if you look on her email, there's also Duke Shell's number. Duke Shell is her supervising licensed psychologist. So you can always call those two folks' numbers to get a hold of an emergency as well.
Pete, I have one more thing to add.
Sure.
So if you call our number and the 693-4223, and then it says like, if this is an after hours emergency, hit 7. Number 7 plays the mobile crisis hotline number for Buncombe and Henderson County, and also gives you Rachel's cell phone. So if it's a mental health crisis and you're enrolled at St. Gerard House, whatever program that may be, but if you're not and you wait, the mobile hotline for the different counties is listed on our, directly on our voicemail.
Hi, guys.
Great. Thank you, guys.
When you call 911, it's a county dispatcher that answers the phone. And if your address is inside the city limits and you need police, you'll get transferred to the city dispatchers who dispatch for the city police officers. If you need an officer, so say something like that's going on, and I know the types of things you're talking about going on in the neighborhood. It is not a problem for you to call that business number and ask them to have an officer come through and, hey, this is going on. You don't have to leave your name. You don't have to meet with an officer. A lot of times, by the time we get there, unfortunately, it's like, where did they go? It's not happening now.
Right.
It can be, and I know it's as frustrating for an officer to get there and not find what's going on, knowing that it probably was going on. And I can remember working the south side of town and getting those calls and sometimes camping out up at the playground, just to be there, and to kind of put a stop to it. But it's not a problem for you to call the business number if it's not necessarily an emergency. Hey, I'd like to have an officer come through my neighborhood. And so typically when I was working patrol and I would get calls like that, I'd actually get out and I'd walk around the neighborhood. Unfortunately, and I don't want to sound like I'm making excuses, we are really short-staffed at the moment. And so typically daytime, we're working a lot of recs and a lot of paperwork calls. And we kind of get lost in that, and the customer service for actually getting out and patrolling neighborhoods kind of comes down.
Yes.
We are working on getting fully staffed and kind of trying to instill in our new officers, hey, you need to get out and patrol the beats that you're assigned. It's not just responding call to call to call to call. And that's something City Council has approved us for more officers going forward. So as far as ongoing training, so initially a new officer will go to the 1-week CIT class, which covers, it does not just cover folks on the spectrum, it covers all folks that we may come into contact with. So during that week, we have 1 day per that somebody from a different organization comes in. We do site visits, and so that's kind of a taste of the training. And specifically having to do with folks on the spectrum, I recently, since I started teaching at Blue Ridge, the CIT class, or not really teaching it, but facilitating it. That's a better explanation of that.
Yeah, we've gone to 3 different ones to train 3 different groups of people. Just for and we were like one of several organizations going to teach on their specific.
So going forward, I talked to our chief about integrating more training, like on a more regular basis, to kind of expand on that. I mean, because it feels to me, I've been through the training twice. And every time I've gone, or both times I've gone through it, and then the 2 times that I've taught, I pick up something new, like, oh, a new technique, or hey, this works well for this, or this works well for this, you know, take off your, turn off your blue lights with this, with this situation. So, uh, speaking from my own point of view, I rely heavily on the folks that I'm dealing with, that are there on scene, particularly somebody that may have a rapport with the person. Speaking from a canine handler's point of view, there are very rare circumstances when we take one of our dogs into a house. There's some very specific reasons to take the dog in a house, and I can't imagine responding to a 911 call at your house unless you called and said there's a man in here with a gun or something like that, or that we can't just let them out for bring them in somebody's house for no good reason. And to address, gosh, I lost my train of thought there. You had asked about the ongoing training, and so we're working on that. And I think what's funny is a lot of our younger officers, say under the age of 25, when we get them from the police academy, I want to throw us all under the bus here. So police training, I'd say for the last 25 years, has fallen short in many ways. And one of them, I think, is training worst case scenario. And, I was 35 when I went through basic law enforcement training. I'd lived 35 years of life. And then, I was in the Marines for 8 years. I've been around the world. I've interacted with many different types of people. And so I have life experience. And so we're getting folks out of the academy that are very young, 21, 22, and they've grown up with their face in a cell phone or a computer and really don't comprehend how to interact one-on-one with a person and have a conversation. And so in addition to training, because when we get officers out of the academy, they have been basically trained. They really don't know how to be a police officer. They know a bunch of knowledge that's been crammed in their heads, and they can regurgitate it, but they really don't know how to be a police officer. So some of these folks, we're having to teach them how to be a person first, and then teach them kind of how to police. And so it's an uphill battle with that. But the biggest thing, my biggest pet peeve with new recruits we're getting, is training for worst case scenario, and the lack of training in just dealing with folks on a regular basis. And so, like, the big thing that we try to integrate or that we do integrate into our field training program is we push, hey, treat people the way you want to be treated in return. And I speak from 9 years of experience, having very few uses of force, except in situations where it was absolutely necessary. And I'll tell you right now, I'm horrible behind a computer screen. I'm much more personable when I can stand in front of you and interact with you face to face. And
hey everybody, thanks for letting me come in on these last few minutes of family group night. It's such a great and important topic. I won't take too much of your time. I'm just here to let you know that if you are still looking for something for your young one to do for Summer Connect starts the last week of June, and I've got two age groups, 6 to 10, 11 to 19, and it's a fun way to make friends, practice being in social situations, which we haven't done very much in these last few months. Work on some emotional regulation, and just have fun together. So I'm going to be sending out an email tomorrow. And just as a short reminder, I'm sure many of you have already gotten an email from me, and thanks for letting me join, Caroline and Berta. It's good to see you guys.
And Sharon, just kind of full circle, Pete's wife, Jen, used to run our Connect program at one point.
Oh, Jen Late. Is that how
Yeah.
you say your last name? Oh,
Yeah.
very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Pete, this has been great. We've just got a few minutes left. Do you have any wrap-up thoughts, or does anybody have any extra questions? Or please, everybody, be sure and look through the chat, because there's phone numbers and some other ways to contact the mobile unit and different things like that that are important information. And and you can always save the chat, and that saves that information on your desktops, so you don't have to go around copying and pasting. Next month, we are having Miss Beth Austin, who's a speech pathologist, speak. She's phenomenal. She's worked with my son and a lot of our kids in the grotto for many years, and we just love Miss Beth. Everybody does. My son is in the background right now imitating her laugh as he laughs really loud. So be sure and look out for information for that. And Pete, this has been so great, and I love that you spend so much time building rapport with your community, and I think that's probably the most important thing that we can do with our kiddos, and getting to know you guys better. So anything we can do to help facilitate that, please reach out to us.
Well, and I'll be in touch with you about upcoming trainings for our department, and kind of going forward. And I think just something to leave you with is, like, just remember that, and I, like I said, I speak for our small police department. Every profession has a bad egg, and unfortunately, the profession that I'm in, when you got a bad egg, it puts a blemish on all of us. Here in Hendersonville, I don't think we have that. And I would urge you to get out and meet the folks that are patrolling your streets. Come by the police department and say, hey, I'd like to meet the team, or I'd like to meet the officer that's patrolling my neighborhood, and get to know them, introduce your kids to them. There is no police officer that works for our department that if you ask them to talk to your children or show them their police car or talk to them about stuff, there's nobody that would say no. The majority of us have children. And, I think, again, for me, forming relationships with some of the kids that we have come into contact with on a regular basis has helped them, one, to trust that we're there to help them versus, there to hold them accountable for something, and letting them see that, we're just people that happen to wear a uniform. And I know, and speaking from my own children's perspective, sometimes in the past, like when I was a canine officer, I wore an external vest that had all kinds of stuff on it, most of it for the dog. But, looking in the mirror, it's like, wow, I kind of look like a RoboCop or something. There's all this stuff hanging off of me. And, it's stuff you need, but then, people would stop me in the park and be like, what is all this stuff? You look like you're going into combat. And so we're getting away from that. We're redesigning our uniform so it's a little more one uniform, and so that we're recognizable as a police officer versus, don't expect Barney Fife, but we'll be more recognizable as a police officer, and less looking like we're heading into combat. Because I think at the end of the day, we gotta be presentable to the community, and so get out there and come by the police department. Come by and ask for me. I'll give you a tour of the police department. We're going to be in our new building in the fall, down there between, was it 7th Avenue and 64. We got a new building going up, so we'll have all of our stuff in one building versus the 6 that it's in now, all over town. And come by and meet us and get to know them. And if you see one of us driving around, flag us down. Nothing made me happier when I was working patrol than somebody flagging me down, having a chat like what the young lady was talking about. A police presence in her neighborhood. Tell me about it. Hey, this is going on. We'd like to see you in here more often. A lot of times that can have a greater effect on an officer's, frequency through a neighborhood. If, somebody that lives in that neighborhood talks to them directly and says, hey, this is going on. This is when I'm seeing it. Could you please come through here more often? In my experience, establishing a relationship with the community, it's beneficial to everyone. And most specifically, I think kids on the spectrum for sure, just given my small bit of experience with a couple of very specific young people that had a tendency in the past to kind of go sideways when we showed up. And now they're like, hey, Pete, how's it going? So
Well,
it's kind of
thank you.
I really appreciate you having me. I feel honored.
Thank you for taking the time to meet with us tonight. Yeah. I hope you all enjoyed your meals, and please come back and let us know, give us any feedback that you or ideas, and we'll pass them out to the group. So we really appreciate you all.
If you have questions or comments or whatever that you didn't think of while we were there, feel free to send me a message or whatever, and I'll get back to you as quickly as I can.
Great.
Have any suggestions?
Yeah.